yeah, welcome everyone to this Future Vision series webinar. So this is a series that explores the next generation technologies at the cutting edge of research and development that are set to transform industries. The industry in question today being gaming, and specifically immersive gaming. So for context, I'm techUK's program manager for emerging technologies. techUK is the UK's technology trade association. We've got about 1,100 member companies, mostly startups and SMEs, but also all the kind of big ones you'd expect in that do tech. And we're a non-profit, and essentially we aim to make the UK the best place possible for technology, be that the development, application, or commercialization of tech. I sit within our technology and innovation team, and I lead on our emerging technologies activity. So that covers a few dozen technologies, including AR, VR, XR, AI, and advanced software and semiconductors and everything that kind of goes into gaming. I launched our activity in gaming in January. And there's been quite a lot that's happened to date. So it kicked off with an Industries of the Future webinar, where we explored the gaming industry of the future. We've had a Supercharging Investment Roundtable in Warwick, which Vicky and Soul Assembly as well were present for, which was fantastic. We've had a Gaming Peaks workshop, where we invited telecom providers and gaming companies and government to sit around the table and discuss how we can avoid peaks in internet traffic around gaming uploads and downloads, updates and downloads. And we've had a few other things as well, a panel on Web3 and immersive gaming, organised with Shoesmiths, one of our law firm members, in January, and lots more to come as well. So do visit the Innovation Hub. I'll put the link in the chat in a minute, and yeah, interact with what we're doing. But now on to immersive gaming, and I said I was really excited for this topic because I think it's a culmination of the work we've done in gaming so far, but also it leads on to our work in Web3 and immersive technologies that I'll be launching in May. And I think it's just a fascinating topic, and I've spoken to all our speakers separately, and just really enjoyed kind of geeking out about just where the sector's going. So I think we'll have a fantastic discussion here today. In terms of the format, there are just 4 kind of themes that we'll structure the discussion around. The first, we'll kind of set the scene and ask just what are immersive technologies and how are they at a high level expected to transform the experience of gaming. Then we'll look a bit more at the infrastructure upon which these will depend. So the technical infrastructure, be that cloud or edge or semiconductors, that will underpin it. Then we'll look to the UK, as we often do at techUK, and say, where is the UK when it comes to the development or the application of these technologies, and where are we leading, and where is there still kind of more to do? And then finally, we'll turn to that kind of what more question, and ask what more UK industry and government can do to maximize the opportunities in immersive gaming. So without further ado, I think we'll go around our speakers, and if in just about 20 seconds each, you could please say who you are, where you're from, and what your interest is in the topic. Vicky, I'll start with you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Rory, and hello everyone. Happy Monday. It's good to see so many of you online on a kind of rainy Monday. But my name's Vicky Williams. I'm a senior policy and research manager from the Digital Catapult. So Digital Catapult are a innovation centre looking at the sort of promoting the adoption and acceleration of digital technologies, of which immersive is one of them. But I'm in our policy and external affairs team, and I broadly lead a lot of our work with the immersive technology team on metaverse, Web3, and we're sort of reaching towards gaming as well as techUK. So really delighted to be here and talk about it more. But prior to joining the Catapult, I also completed my PhD on immersive technologies as well. So a lot of that covered gaming. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vicky. It's great to have you here. Mark, can I come to you next?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rory. So Mark Turner. I work for a company called Paulson. I'm responsible for our commercial operations. We are a data center network and cloud business, specialize in the UK because we're only in the UK, and we've got data centers all around the main cities in the UK. One of our biggest client bases is gaming companies, as we've helped particularly people with a particular need put low latency services out into the country. So gaming's become real interesting for us as a business. My personal involvement is a 50-year-old geek who still loves to game and uses it as the primary way to communicate with my children who live on the things. But I am still a bit of an obsessive console player. So it's personal and work, and that's always quite nice when that comes together, right?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Yep, I also aspire to be a kind of gaming dad one day. James, over to you.
Hi there, everybody. I'm James Horn, and I'm project director at Soul Assembly. We're an XR games studio based in Leamington Spa. We make games predominantly for MetaQuest, standalone VR headsets, and mixed reality games. So we do a game called The Cabin, which came out last year, which is a sort of mixed reality and VR game that was on the Meta headsets and also the Pico headsets. And we also had a game out for the Vision Pro for its launch at the beginning of the year. And we've been doing VR and AR since sort of 2016 in one form or another.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. So a real mix of speakers here today, and I think, yeah, really well placed to cover the four topics I set out earlier. So first of all, the kind of scene setting question, and feel free to jump in any of the speakers where you see fit. Just what are immersive technologies, specifically in gaming? I mean, who wants to go for that one?
I'm happy to kick off if that's helpful. Well, I think what we really saw, it's interesting, James, that you said that you started sort of developing games for immersive technologies sort of back in 2016, but I think 2016 was a sort of really pivotal time where we saw the emergence of new headsets like the HTC Vive and PlayStation VR and all these sort of new consumer technologies that really drew out of sort of push in the 90s even for sort of immersive technologies and specifically looking at gaming as well. So we really saw a sort of resurgence of new headsets and devices from sort of 2016 onwards. And I think what we've seen since then is really a sort of development of not just the headsets themselves and the sort of hardware that's enabling these immersive gaming experiences, but actually how we're conceiving of those experiences. So obviously Meta have put a lot of money and effort into their devices, and we've seen the metaverse as a whole thing kind of erupt and emerge, and a load of investment kind of breaching towards what Meta have really sort of hammered home as the metaverse, and this idea that it's going to be a sort of social network that's enabled by avatars and essentially making social media a world that we can all interact and play in. And obviously more recently we've seen Apple's Vision Pro coming out, which I'm guessing everyone here will be aware of, and again that sort of conceptualization of spatial computing really does change the game again, where we're not just thinking of world building here, but actually sort of how gaming has set the standard essentially in immersive tech, I would say, for a new era where we're thinking of what the internet looks like, what computing looks like more broadly. And gaming, I think, will play a really pivotal role in what that looks like in reality. So, yes, I'm yet to try the Apple Vision Pro. For anyone who has, that's fun. But I think we'll see quite a radical change in sort of moving, not just looking at virtual reality, but a really sort of hard push towards augmented reality and taking familiar interfaces that we're using every day and making them more immersive. So, yeah, I think that's the kind of transition over time.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, and as somebody who's got to use the Vision Pro a few times already, I was just blown away. It's really cool, and I'm really excited to see, particularly if there's a kind of like a lower cost model in the next few years. I think is what could happen, then I want to see it kind of on the heads, in the hands of lots of people. James,
Yeah,
Mark.
I think sort of building on what Vicky said, which I think was a really good summary actually of where we're at. I think this whole term sort of spatial computing that Apple are pushing, trying to get everybody to use rather than using VR or AR or XR or anything like that is quite interesting one, I think, in terms of, because you are thinking spatially, and that's a big part of it. I think it's that gaming content that you can engage with in different ways in space. So in VR, obviously, we're entering into that world in VR, and we're being surrounded by that world. And then the spatial side, the sort of mixed reality side, is the opposite end of that, which is bringing that digital world into our world. And I think that's a big component of it, that display. But also, I think the thing that the Vision Pro does really well, and Apple's and Meta's recent technology on hand tracking has done really well as well, is look at tracking and look at how we control and how we are immersed within that world as well. So whether that's hand tracking, gaze tracking, lip sync, all that stuff, because then that feeds into the personas and avatars, and then that's feeding into connectivity and how we're being social, and then we're back to the metaverse again, which is, we're going to say that a few times, I expect, even though it's not a very trendy word at the moment.
Thanks, James. And yeah, it's interesting you mentioned tracking. I think the Vision Pro has 23 different sensors, and it's that kind of groundbreaking combination of sensors, some of which have not been kind of that commercially viable before, that I think will give us the opportunity for the first time to have these truly immersive worlds where previous hardware has just not been able to kind of do that, I guess. Mark.
I guess it's much more of an end user take from me, because I'm much more in supporting gaming companies doing what they want to do and putting the infrastructure behind it. From the end user point, I'd love to have tried a Vision Pro. So I'm off to the States in May. Going to be queuing in an Apple store somewhere, assuming nothing's happened in the UK. What it sounds like to me, when I hear immersive gaming, is you want to be in it, right? You really want. So we all think headsets. Need to evolve to something that have got more of a broader appeal and aren't quite so expensive. But we assume immersive, as in we're in it and we feel in it. And one of the things that I'm really aware of in the work that we've done with people in the industry is that generally infers some very high quality processing, high quality graphics, high quality generation. That's all driving the data set up and through the roof. And that's where we often end up with our clients who are trying to solve the technical problem, particularly around transmission, when they're not wanting to do it on a headset like Apple are. That's quite a challenge, because like everything, it's all getting very, very, very heavy on the data side. So immersive, that's what I think. I think it's got to be really good quality. It's got to be really low latency. It's got to be something that completely convinces you you're involved and immersed, whether that be interaction with your friends and teams as avatars or playing in a virtual world. You don't want something that's clunky, slow, and only as a little screen. So it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. I mean, those are certainly topics that I'd like to touch upon in the next section, but absolutely crucial to making all of this work. And we shouldn't forget for 1 second just that what this all depends upon. It's interesting. I mean, a lot of people, when they think of immersive tech, think of headsets, and particularly VR headsets. Interesting that software can play a role in this as well. I was speaking to a company a few days ago called Visualax, who do holograms for your smartphone, where you upload a piece of video content and it converts it into a 3D hologram. Really cool tech, but just kind of goes to show you don't need a clunky headset and to shell out however many hundreds or thousands. Incidentally, if you want to watch, if you want to hear more from the founder of that company, he'll be speaking on our Exploring the Future of Esports webinar coming up on the 16th of May. I'll put the link in the chat to that. So brilliant. And I guess we've touched upon some of the key technologies that we'd consider immersive, some of the key characteristics that these may have that allow us to feel like we are immersed within a digital or a virtual world. I'd be interested to get your take the three of you on just, I guess, where are we seeing this transformation take place? We've seen a few new headsets. I guess we're seeing AI coming to this increasingly, or kind of, are you seeing any early signs of a really tantalizing future for immersive gaming?
We do a lot of work with startups, people who are putting the money in, trying to create the new models. One of those problems that we've talked about already is that idea of the Apple Vision Pro, for example, fantastic premium device. It's not going to have mass market appeal at that price, so they've got some work to do. But the startup I've worked with, for example, is taking the other approach. The headset's dirt cheap because they want to stream it, right? So they're going to stream it, but that puts huge workload onto the network, onto the data where the data is stored in the data center. So a completely different approach. We're trying to find a way to make it very affordable to the end user is a big part of the conversation that we've had with startups trying to get into this space, thinking this is startup, thinking this is an opportunity for them.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that comes into the question in the chat as well around the potential market size of immersive gaming. I mean, until adoption of these devices can take off, and until the kind of developer ecosystem is there as well, then we're just not going to get that kind of mass market growth. James, do you want to come in?
Yeah. I think there's I think it is a really interesting market because there's so many different directions to look at it from. So obviously, Apple entering the market means a lot of new people are taking notice, which is interesting. Apple's headset is flawed in lots of ways, but it's a first iteration, and I think it's a great headset in lots of ways. It's a terrible headset in other ways, but I think it's a start, and it's a signal of intent. And I think within the VR industry particularly, I think every year there's usually at some point Bloomberg will do an article about why VR is dead. Every year they do it every year. They still haven't managed to predict its death, but it's ups and downs. So Apple enters the market, big up. PlayStation VR 2, big flop. It's a right mess. Pico, very odd in and out of the market, can't quite make up their mind what they're doing. And then Meta have actually been really consistent. I mean, I think you shouldn't underestimate how much Meta are the cornerstone of the whole thing here. And it's a bit worrying in lots of ways because obviously Meta are just one company. But at the same point, they obviously they've put their money where their mouth is. And they're moving things fast if you look at how fast things have gone. Just to sort of quickly touch back on the AI, I think AI, I was interested to know how much we would stray over into AI, because obviously it's such a it's a hot topic at the moment. I think AI, and particularly sort of standalone VR, are at interesting places with each other, because there's lots of generative and sort of interesting things going on in the AI field. But the sort of meshes and the sort of things that are being generated by AI are the polar opposite of what you actually need for VR, because they're the meshes and the tech of them is I'm trying to find a word apart from dog shit, but I'm afraid I can't. They're really bad meshes, and they don't run fast on headsets. And what you need is really performant things on headsets, so your headset's running at 72 FPS. So yeah, I think it's an interesting area. It's certainly early days. Everybody will promise the world via it, but only a few will come out on top and find that nugget of gold, I think.
I think that's
sure. Thanks, James. Yeah, that's really interesting to note. And I guess, yeah, there are two sides to this. It's like, what are we seeing from AI now, and what could we be seeing in a few years' time where those problems are solved? And in fact, it could be driving a lot of the trends in VR. I guess it's just too early to tell, and a lot is still under wraps. Brilliant. I think now's kind of a good time to switch on to the second part of the discussion, which is about the infrastructure that underpins a lot of this, which, as we've said, is absolutely crucial. Mark, probably a good place to start with you. Edge, cloud, data centers. Can you give us your take on just how integral these are to the future of immersive gaming, particularly in the UK?
I don't know how. I mean, we're definitely supporting a lot of interest from people trying to create solutions, create future technologies to underpin gaming on the basis that they think edge is going to be a big part of it. We've been trading as an edge infrastructure business for a couple of years, but is still a pretty embryonic market with lots of speculation that's going to be huge and no massive identified use cases. But one of the verticals, as we talk about in sales language, that's really lots and lots of dialogue is gaming. And from the label that we've put it on this call, immersive gaming, there are a couple of things driving it. There is the cloud is increasingly got a question mark over it. And when I say the cloud, I mean hyperscaler cloud, as in, is it the right solution for what I'm trying to do? We see a lot of scale ups the moment they're getting beyond startup, starting to look at, can I do this in a better place? The way we've positioned ourselves in the UK is we can get to every metropolitan city. So we can get you, into the local loop very quickly. It is just someone else's data center, but it's in the same city as your target users. It's straight into their broadband network. We can give you guaranteed under 10 millisecond latency. And that's an interest depending on what is going on. We do have some conversations linking to the last conversation about AI, which I think are interesting. I can see exactly James's point. I'm not sure those two technologies are converged yet, but it looks really interesting because we're doing similar work in the AI space where, for exactly the same reasons, people like NVIDIA are talking to us about putting inference nodes, i.e. the interactive model when it's trained at the edge. So it can be close, so it can be fast, so it can interact in a private way. And for both data sets, i.e. the immersive gaming, there are things to consider these days around regulation and where you store and what's sovereign and what's not. And do you want everything going back off into the global hyperscaler cloud? And I do wonder about, the amount of content that's going to have to be generated for these immersive worlds, how big a role AI might play in that, because that's been, as an end user, that's been one of the obvious developments of gaming over the last 10, 15 years. The game cycle's gone from 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whereas things like, the big games that my teenagers love are once every 7 years because the amount of effort and cost that goes into generate those. So then think about what I'm seeing from the immersive gaming sector where they're wanting these things, the AI sector, and I wonder how those two might plug together and what opportunity those two might bring. But from an infrastructure point of view, if you're not on the device, just to finish up from my point, from our side, it's about real low latency networks. It's about local storage of data to bring stuff closer to the client, closer to the end user, closer to the user. And that's what we're trying to enable with, again, a pretty large startup community who are really still dabbling on this thing.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. And I think maybe, we can touch upon startups in the next section, because obviously, most of our membership are startups and SMEs, and they're kind of integral to the whole picture, even if the headlines are grabbed by the big ones, the big players. Brilliant. Vicky, I'm wondering if you could give your take on this, and I'd be curious to know just where this question of infrastructure comes into your work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really good to hear, Mark, that convergence piece is the critical point here. And I think what we'd have a tendency to do in the UK is look at our technologies in silos to a degree. It's great to see that we're pursuing the as much as we are the artificial intelligence and the safe rollout of AI, and we're investing a lot of money in that. And I think we're starting to see new things like the Eisenbar Data Centre in Bristol that will be a really sort of critical national infrastructure. I think one of the things we need to think about is how we extend infrastructure like that and use existing infrastructure to extend not just for artificial intelligence period and researchers working in that space, but actually go, how does AI interface with things like XR, gaming, other things like quantum that are sort of on the horizon as well, and really start to enable spaces where developers, especially the UK is built on its startups and SMEs. We've got a stronghold. We need to support them, but really forming those partnerships between startups, universities, your big players like NVIDIA, and that's a lot of what we do at the Catapult. So as part, we sort of support the My World Strengthened Places funded program in the Southwest, for example, and I think regional is a big part of this as well. And we've just done a program of work with NVIDIA looking at creative startups and supporting them. So NVIDIA actually sort of provided the compute power that has supported a number of new creative case studies that have involved haptics and gaming and things. So I think forging more partnerships like that is a really critical thing, and it's something that we at the Catapult really seek to do. And I think on that convergence piece, one of the big programs that we're sort of developing and we've worked on with DSIT, so the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, is called Cyber Physical Infrastructure Ecosystem. And this is really how we're sort of looking at this. And it's a big mouthful, but what we're really seeing is that convergence of the digital and the physical, and there are a number of technologies that sort of underpin that ecosystem, right? You've got digital twins, you've got virtual production, which is a big sort of evolving space that very heavily uses and relies on games engine technologies, but all these new ways of creating and enabling virtual environments that extend beyond XR solely. But what we really need to do, I think, in the UK is bring all these jigsaw pieces together, and take, you know, what existing infrastructure we have, the big companies and the small ones that we've got, and actually really facilitate those spaces for best practice and forging those partnerships. So yeah, I think we'll see a real, hopefully, like a real evolution of these technology areas starting to be considered more in a dialectical relationship, as opposed to, you know, being just AI over here, immersive over here, gaming over here, and actually think about how they all come together. And then we've got, you know, other areas of infrastructure like Web3 that I think sort of again really took off a couple of years ago. But again, I think the UK, I know we'll get onto this question later, but Web3 could really sort of change the way that underlying virtual worlds really sort of operate and create new roles of a user, where they're not just consumers of data that's fed to them, but they're actually sort of creating those spaces, creating those worlds, creating assets, and you know, that they're gaining from them. So I think there will be a real transition enabled by Web3 infrastructure as well, and I think we'll see some sort of bigger shifts in that direction. You've got things like Decentraland already, where you know, people can create assets. There's a lot of brands in that environment where you can essentially buy assets and have a role in how that world sort of operates and how the reward system works. And I think gaming will really fundamentally shape that as well. So lots of different moving parts, but I think what we need to do in the UK is start to think more on a systems level, as opposed to individual technologies on their own.
Thanks for that, Vicky. Yeah, and it's really a very good point actually, that Web3 could have the potential to change the infrastructure actually upon which much of this depends. And as I said, from May, I'll be launching at techUK's work on Web3 and immersive tech. So do stay tuned for that. Also, your point around convening the whole of the UK's tech ecosystem, I think is something techUK essentially exists to do, but it's not easy. And yeah, it's good to see that there are others that have a similar goal to us. And as techUK members, of course, Digital Catapult, you know, I'd love to work with you on that. James, I'd like to come to you, and then Mark, I'll come to you about a question in the chat just to round off the infrastructure segment.
Yeah, well, in lots of ways, I think the sort of work we do, we're working predominantly on the Quest, and so actually a lot of that stuff's fairly old school. So so the sort of data packs, I think someone was asking about sort of data and what sort of infrastructure we need for that. I mean, it's the same as any standard sort of network gaming for the current ways that we're doing networking. I think we're not doing a sort of large scale game streaming yet, the sort of stuff that Stadia tried to do a couple of years ago, but we will get there. And I think from an infrastructure point of view, I mean, I've been signed up to the 5G things and things like that over the years, and it's all coming. It's quite slow, but it is coming, and I think that's the same with a lot of this infrastructure stuff. It's coming, yeah, like the super fast broadband there. If you come to Leamington and Warwick, you'll see that half of it's dug up entirely because they're sticking broadband down everywhere and ruining everything and sticking green boxes everywhere. But it's all coming, but it's a bit slow, and I think we're sort of ready for that, but we're not there yet, and so it's coming, but it's not immediate from a gaming point of view anyway.
Sure. Okay, that's I guess slightly encouraging, mildly encouraging. Although, yeah, maybe we'd want it sooner. Mark, I'd like to come to a question in the chat that I think is kind of a good one to round us off on. In regards for digital infrastructure, data centers and connectivity, what would you say is the minimal requirement to enable immersive gaming for the wider population? Is there a short answer to this?
I think probably not, because it would all depend on the use case, right? I assume, and I'm not the expert as James and Vicky, but they'll know a lot more of the detail. There'll be plenty of requirements which don't need much. I can talk about some of the work we've done. As an example, with a company wanting to deploy a streaming headset proof of concept for a massive online environment where there's multiple users interacting in VR. And so we did a trial in one of the cities in Scotland for them. That was the target city they wanted to use as a kind of, it's the right size. And there was all kinds of complications. What they needed was sub 10 millisecond latency to every user. That was the ask. And you can't do that, as we might have naively hoped at the beginning, just by putting it in Scotland. The way broadband is deployed in the UK, it does require quite some collaboration between the carriers. You've got the actual broadband providers. You find some strange deviations when you put something in Edinburgh and it's accidentally routed by London to go down Virgin's broadband pipe, for example, and you're not getting the latency you would expect. So that's where we've spent time helping clients, looking at the latency that they can achieve on the local, where we can place them in the city, and then being able to backhaul that both across the UK and then to their back end, which is in AWS, which is very common. It's where you might store it. You're not going to stream it from there, but enabling all of that. So they had a local cloud in a local data center. They had very low latency connectivity. They had the right carrier, and they could deliver to their average user base less than 10 millisecond, which you needed, because apparently otherwise you ended up throwing out, because it's streamed VR, and if it's out of sync with your head, you're going to feel quite unwell. So I don't think there is a simple answer, but that is an example of real focus on low latency, focus on local connectivity. For a streaming solution, I think they're going to be requirements, right? You're going to need those. You put it all on the headset as a fixed piece of software, they're irrelevant though, right? So then you're going to need a real swanky headset and give Apple a lot of money at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. That's really interesting, and I don't think anyone wants to be throwing up whilst immersed in their gaming. Brilliant. So the next segment is on the UK specifically, and just kind of if we're well placed to lead on these technologies that we say are so fundamental to immersive gaming or are coming around the corner. James, I remember when we last spoke, you said that you were one of the few gaming studios to develop a game for the Apple Vision Pro upon its launch. And you said, I think that maybe 2 of 10 that ended up doing so are based in the UK. Does that suggest that we're quite good?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a well-known thing that there's a great games industry in the UK. I think we do punch above our weight in terms of number of game studios and the experience that we've got as a games industry in the UK. So there may well be others, but I do know, I've just come back from GDC a few weeks ago, the game conference in San Francisco, and met plenty of people who have sort of tried the Vision Pro, had a look at it, but there's only been a couple of studios that have made games for it, and that's partly there's a reason for that, is that the market is this big. The sort of it's a very, very early stage, and so business model wise there isn't a huge attraction early on, but yeah, it's definitely, I think it's a sign that there are we do punch above our weight, I guess. Can't remember exactly what the question was, Rory.
It was just about that. So thanks, James. That's good to know, and it's good to kind of have some, I guess, like practical on the ground experience as someone who has, as a studio that has developed a game recently in immersive gaming. Vicky, do you have a take on just where we are as the UK in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo James's point that we've got a really sort of strong and thriving games ecosystem in the UK, and I think we're seeing some really promising signs from government that they're taking it seriously. It's taken long enough, but I know UK, for example, are doing some brilliant work looking at the game sector, and we're starting to get there. I think what we need to see more of is more support for small developers. I think where the UK really excel, if we're looking at creative content, we've got a really strong sort of creative IP across the board. I think a lot of businesses are willing to sort of take the content that they're creating for different mediums and adapt it for things like immersive technologies. And I think we just need to basically see a continued support of that creative IP and encourage more game developers to interact with things like immersive technologies. Again, really sort of bringing that ecosystem together, which is I know obviously what both techUK and Digital Catapult seek to do. So I think we've seen some sort of promising signs. The budget recently from government has sort of indicated that there's been some relatively promising things around tax credits and sort of incentives in that regard. But I think we really need to continue to highlight the strengths we've got in the UK's game sector, and also for XR specifically as well. We've got a really strong university base, a lot of researchers doing work in this space, and I think it's just bringing all of that together and taking the strengths that we're seeing or pushing for in safe AI, and start to use some of those frameworks to think more about how do we develop safe immersive technologies. We've just talked about Apple's sensors, for example, and how that's improving the experience, but we also want to ensure that we are supporting privacy enhancing technologies and ensuring that user information is being safely used and stored by technology companies as well. So I think what we need to really do is think about XR and gaming at the same level as we're starting to think about AI and how we can really push for that more funding, more opportunities for developers to access finance and start building stuff and really enhance that startup and SME community.
Thanks, Vicky. James, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so I think sort of talking wider, like Vicky's just been saying there, I think because as I said before as well about the games industry traditionally has been strong. I would say we are struggling at the moment though. I mean, we're struggling from years of underinvestment in the creative industries. So yeah, I think it was only a couple of days ago there was an announcement they were going to cut arts degrees and creative arts degrees. This is despite last year there being we're fully for the creative industries, but we're going to take all that money away. So that whole university level is going to be hammered because and this is the interesting thing, I guess, where tech meets the creative industries, because governments love pouring money into tech. Yeah, great. Yeah, let's make everybody study maths until they're 18. Art subjects, no, we don't want those. And the reality is that the creative industries are strong because they're a mix of both. And you can see it in the whole DCMS side of things, which is, I can't remember what it's called now, DCMS and whatever the other bit's called, but it can't decide where games is between those two. It literally, you go to the website and try and find out which part of those two parts of it they fall into. Is it culture? Is it technology? It's neither. Yeah, it's a massive, huge, £3.6 billion going to GDP in 2023. And so I think, government-wise, we've got that. We're going to have we've got a skills shortage already, which is going to be made worse by a lack of investment in university and training. Got more of a skills shortage because of Brexit and all of the things to do with that. That is a huge barrier for the games industry. Massive hit there. And so yeah, we were well positioned, but it's getting worse all the time. And so I'm going to be I'm generally Mr. Positive, but in this case, I'm not Mr. Positive. I think we're in a bad place at the moment. If anyone follows me on Twitter, you'll soon sort of see that I moan about this quite a lot.
Okay, thanks, James. Go on, Vicky.
Just to add to that, I think this is a really valid point in that we want to be a science and technology superpower in the UK, which is fantastic. I think what we often do underestimate is the strength of our creative sector. here. And I think the game sector is one of the critical examples of making this really work. And I think this actually will need to extend more into the XR space. And often what we'll see is, there's really good funding pots here and there, in Coventry. Well, it's the West Midlands more broadly, that there's a current Innovate UK grant to support creative, immersive companies in region. And I think what we need to really see is more of that. I think we take for granted actually the cluster strengths of where, Leamington's one really critical example of a really fantastic games sort of sector regionally, as is in Scotland. There's around Dundee and in-game at Dundee as well. So I think we need to really see more of that funding opportunity that's actually going, here's where our creative strength lies. Gaming, is a really good growth opportunity for the UK. It's something that we could excel in. But I think we need to really own that more and see more of that, dialogue happening around us, the UK being a true supporter of creative technology innovation.
Sure.
Yeah, there are. I mean, I'd say that there are some really fantastic organisations. I mean, Digital Catapult is absolutely fantastic one. Innovate UK, Create Central. There's some really, really great funds. The UK Games Fund is great. The tax breaks that we've had on the games industry since 2014 as well, really, really positive as well. So I think there's lots of positives, and there's also a whole load of negatives as well. So it's that sort of bit of both.
Okay. I mean, that's exactly what we want to hear, I think, because we understand nothing is perfect, and we need to kind of bring these challenges to the surface, I think, to start addressing them. So that's all good. Mark, anything you'd like to add on the where is the UK, and are we well positioned to lead in immersive gaming?
Just supportive and recognise everything that James and Vicky have said. I was reflecting as they were speaking of all of the clients we're working with, all but one have got seed funding from abroad. So they're all relying on foreign investment, and that is a real shame. We're a regional business and they're all regional players. This isn't London based. This is Scotland's big, Northeast is big, Northwest is big, where we're working with these, one-man, two-man, five-man businesses trying to create the future. And they're going back to their American investors for the next round and for the next round and for the next round. And that's a shame, because we've got a fantastic, huge homegrown market. We have to look at all of, gaming is huge here. I think it's the second largest in Europe. I think our data says something in the order of 7 billion a year. Even with some of the good stuff mentioned, James shared at the end there, I'm not sure it's getting the attention that an industry of that size probably should. And the access to capital is always what's holding the UK back, and you wonder what the government could do to free that up.
Sure, that's a really good point. I mean, I can certainly echo that. As I said, this is a very new area for techUK. I launched in January, and I think one of our key value adds is championing the sector and giving it the legitimacy and the voice that it deserves, compared to other parts of the tech sector that do extremely well when it comes to attracting funding, even within the UK and from government. So yeah, go on, Vicky.
No, I was just going to say, I think government has absolutely one role to play in this, and actually really pushing that message out. But also, there's a real need for private investment as well, and looking at big companies supporting the UK's ecosystem in this space, as well as government, and making sure that we're matching, big companies are supporting smaller companies, and how we can enable more of that to happen. And I think it does start by recognising the strength we have in both immersive and gaming. And really pushing that message out so that investors feel confident putting money into it as well.
Sure, and maybe a final question for you, Vicky, before we move on to the final section. So James mentioned that creative degrees are kind of seeing their funding cut, and I understand that universities and research are a critical part of all of this, and is often where the next generation of creatives and emerging technologies come from. Would you say that we're doing enough in the UK when it comes to either joining up universities with industry, with government, and kind of making those connections, or are there kind of missed opportunities in the gaming and immersive tech space?
It's a really good question, and I think there's some good examples of where it really works. There's some fantastic universities that are doing this, and Warwick is one of them in the West Midlands. That that there's a real sort of there's new centres emerging that are focused on things like gaming, where they're actually sort of taking the local ecosystem of startups, SMEs, and companies that are doing really great stuff, bringing them into the universities to work with researchers and also, you know, give talks to students and things. I think it's something that we can definitely do more of, and I think we're seeing more of it. I think researchers now are more aware of the challenges with things. I mean, I know game degrees are still very popular, for example, but the amount of jobs there for the students coming out of those degrees, then you know, there's not enough there for all of them. But also having those really sort of practical skill sets that I think games companies, especially the bigger companies, want ready-made, you know, experts in a certain area. So I think the more we can encourage those partnerships so that students are leaving university with the skills that they need to get the jobs, and making sure that, yeah, we're taking advantage of the amazing talent we've got in the UK, you know, that there needs to be more support for that. And I think we'll see, you know, there's more sort of skills work that's happening where it's sort of a lifelong learning approach, learning on the job, more apprenticeships, that it will all sort of continue to evolve. And it's a real shame broadly, like it's really sort of the narratives around the cuts to arts degrees at the moment is a real shame. And I think actually what it does is knock confidence in things like gaming, when actually what we need to be doing is celebrating humanities degrees and what they offer and how students can sort of pivot into these roles like gaming. I, for one, would, you know, I thought that I would work in gaming at some point in my life, obviously, and it's having those opportunities to learn later on as well, where you can actually sort of retrain. I think we'll see more of that, but hopefully that's something that we start to think about and take seriously when it comes to things like gaming.
Absolutely, yeah, and those are certainly, I think, topics that came up in the gaming roundtable that we chaired in Warwick recently, around preparing graduates for the unique circumstances that they might find themselves in the gaming studio, and it can be very different to a traditional degree, I guess. Great. So the final section of this webinar is about what more UK industry and government can do to maximise the opportunities of immersive gaming. So we've touched upon a fair amount of this through the discussion. So you know, the two big challenges of funding and skills. You know, we said that tax reliefs have generally been good for the gaming sector. I think obviously there's been less support, although quite a lot through the likes of Innovate UK when it comes to immersive technologies, albeit, you know, they're a lot newer in some respects, or less mature, should we say, than the UK's gaming sector. We've said about the importance of championing the sector. So I think Vicky mentioned that, and I mentioned that we're certainly looking to do that at techUK. I think there's also an interesting point around related industries that's popped up once or twice, and obviously, you know, gaming is an industry within itself, but it's also it can be, you know, integral or very useful for a whole host of others. So, for example, we've got a webinar coming up on the application of immersive technologies in national security, and that will, you know, will be all about synthetic environments and wargaming and modeling, and you know, AI will come into that as well. But I'm keen to get maybe some of our speakers' takes on just how broadly applicable immersive gaming could be to other industry sectors, applications within the UK. James.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've talked about virtual production already, so I think that's fairly well known within there, and worth saying that is just Unreal as well. It's not, you know, it's Unreal Engine is the only one. Unity have kind of bowed out now of that fight. So that's one area. I think there was another area which has gone completely out of my mind for a second there. What was I going to say? It'll come back to me. I've forgotten it. I'll come back to it.
We'll come back to you, James. Don't worry. Vicky, Mark, do you want to come in?
I think the skills and the technologies that immersive gaming can provide and already are providing are so massively opportunistically going to change some of the stuff we do with other industries who want, so for example, working in the construction industry, supporting their IT backends and their logistics plants, which in some cases, some of the biggest companies, you'd recognize their names on site, managing thousands and thousands of components is based on a bit of paper. And they're working with giants like Microsoft on digital twins and IoT solutions. But that future of being able to visualize an immersive world, understanding what was on site, what's moving off site, knowing when a trailer pulls around it's got the augmented reality opportunity that they're already evangelizing, particularly people like Microsoft. They might not be able to deliver it yet, but even with the vision of the HoloLens, right? They talked about that future. I think Apple want that future where the Vision Pro is nothing more than my glasses, right? And you've got that augmented reality in your vision. All those skills that are being developed and that capability now, that's gonna create an enormous additional opportunity for the skills and the gaming capability that we could grow, because you're going to be able to apply that to a completely different dimension across all kinds of industries, because that immersive and augmented reality is going to be incredibly valuable to people.
Sure. Yeah, I guess, and that's one way in which this will all take off. You know, the applications are beyond gaming, not just within it, and will drive the development, as you mentioned, Mark, of better hardware and all of that. James, have you remembered?
I have remembered. Yeah, the specific one I was thinking of was actually, I think there was a mention of immersive opera on one of the chats as well there, which is, but I think that in the whole sort of performing arts sector, there is definitely a desire for different forms of immersive theatre using game technology. I've did some work a few years ago with the RSC and with Magic Leap over in Miami, in some sort of future ways of using sort of spatial technology for theatre experiences. So that whole area is, there's a huge amount of energy, huge amount of excitement there, particularly when you start to combine it with live events and live just live performance being streamed. You know, that's a great example of streaming volumetrics through sort of high bandwidth. That kind of stuff could be really cool. But I think it does go across. It goes across all industries. You know, that's why Apple are in the sector. They're not in the sector for games. They're in the sector for spatial computing. It's a new paradigm of computing. That's certainly what Magic Leap used to talk about as well. It's about that kind of, you know, how do I think spatially and compute spatially? And so yeah, it's going to be in medical. It's going to be in industry. It's going to be everywhere. And so it's huge.
Yeah, and really exciting. And great that we're exploring it, I think, before it gets huge. I'm going to move on to a question in the chat, because I'm conscious I did want to have a bit of a Q&A at the end. Before I do, I've just put 2 links in the chat to 2 things that are coming up that you can get involved with at techUK. The first is our campaign week, which is next month. It's themed days on different emerging technologies. You can contribute an insight or an article to go live during that week. I think the week last year got around 55,000 impressions online, so it was an extremely popular, I think techUK's second most popular of 21 or 23 different campaign weeks for that year. So my program are kind of continue to smash it there, and I'm sure we'll do so this year. So do sign up if you want to contribute something for us to promote with our network on essentially how the UK can lead in emerging technologies. And then secondly, our Tech and Innovation Summit, which returns this year after our inaugural year last year. And that's a day exploring all sorts of emerging tech, probably at the techUK office, but it could also be external, we don't know yet, in central London. Keynote speakers, some really interesting panel discussions on Web3, immersive tech, robotics, quantum, AI. I've put the link in the chat to that as well. I'd like to come to one question in the chat to start with, and that's, are there any examples of best practice in terms of other countries or regions better supporting their games sector and having tangible results in terms of impact? Who/where globally can we look to learn more from? Specifically on immersive gaming. Who wants to come in on that? We'll just do quick answers and try and get through a few questions.
So I can pivot slightly away from gaming here, but in the immersive tech space, I think we're seeing some particularly sort of on the metaverse bandwagon, but a lot of countries around the globe really started to sort of pull together sort of strategic priority areas focused on how they would enable sort of more immersive the growth of their immersive technology sector through the metaverse, and looking at different things like Web3. We've seen the European Commission on virtual worlds and Web4. China have released a sort of strategy looking at immersive technologies, the metaverse. South Korea are doing a fair bit. I think the US as well, the XR Association in the States have sort of seen similar things to us in the sense that their government's looking at a lot of other technologies, but not sort of taking XR potentially as seriously. But again, they know it's a growing ecosystem of players. So the XRA are doing some fantastic work looking at different use cases for extended reality. But I think Europe is actually really sort of a driving force in this space. And I think actually one of my recommendations on what the UK can do more of is international collaboration. And I think hopefully we'll see more of that now we're sort of past COVID and all the trials and tribulations that brought. But I really hope that we do more sort of with Europe in this space as well.
Sure, thanks, Vicky. Another question, and I might come to James or Mark on this one. As I work for the online regulator, Ofcom, I'm always interested in how industry view the evolving global regulatory landscape. Help or hinder immersive tech adoption? It's a tricky one.
It's not an easy one, and I think it depends on which area you're looking at. I think because obviously there's a lot of data involved. So if you're looking at some of the sort of privacy side of things and regulation of that kind of stuff, you're getting straight into the regulating Facebook and that kind of thing, which is a fairly not just on the XR side, but wider than that. Same with trying to keep control of Apple as well. You can see it in the EU at the moment with trying to get on top of the App Store. So I think there's a degree of that. There's a whole other. It's such a wide topic. I think you could probably do a whole other chat on that one, which is particularly when you start to get AI starts to be involved as well, and the borderlines between broadcast and creating content and user-generated content and how you moderate that, and it becomes this. So yeah, then there's an easy answer.
If I may, I'd just like to add, so Digital Catapult actually are working on a program, Innovate UK funded program. It's a sort of starting point at the moment, but it's a pro-innovation regulatory framework for XR and spatial computing. I think on the regulatory side, and I'd love to have a chat with anyone about this in more detail because it's something I'm quite passionate about, but I think we need an approach. I know the ICO have done a lot of work looking at the implications for immersive technologies as a growing area, and I think what we need to see more of is test beds and spaces, as I've mentioned before, where actually we can bring regulators and innovators into the room together to actually go, what does this best practice look like? How do we develop responsible XR in the same way we're doing with AI, right? Like get people in a room, look at things like facial recognition, body tracking, what is a good framework for this? And we're doing a lot of it in AI, but what we're hoping to do through this initial grant funding is to actually start to bring regulators and innovators in the room together to actually map out what that good collaboration looks like. So yes, please speak to me about these things.
Thanks both. Feel free to put your email addresses in the chat if you want speakers to contact you or you as speakers to contact other people. I've put in the chat also a link to our monthly newsletter, our Tech and Innovation Program newsletter. Do sign up to that. It's free, and my email as well if you'd like to contact me about anything discussed today, collaborating, or techUK.